There are moments in history that you recognize immediately. Moments where something shifts, where the air changes, where the world feels different on the other side of an event than it did before. Most of those moments are loud. Most of them are announced. Most of them come with headlines and press releases and carefully coordinated reveals designed to maximize impact. And then there are the other kind of moments. The ones that nobody planned. The ones that happen quietly in the margins of something enormous, when one person pauses long enough to notice another person standing in the rain. On April 9th, 2026, at Goyang Stadium in South Korea, both kinds of moments happened on the same night. And by the time the sun came up the next morning, the world was still talking about it. This is that story. But before we get to the rain, before we get to the comment that broke the internet, before we get to 60,000 people standing in a stadium that felt like it might actually lift off the ground, we need to go back. Because you cannot understand what happened on April 9th without understanding everything that came before it. You cannot understand why those 6 words hit the way they did unless you understand the silence that preceded them. And you cannot understand the silence unless you understand exactly who ParkJimin is, what he means to the people who love him, and why the 4 years before that night were years that an entire global fandom spent holding their breath. So let's start at the beginning. ParkJimin was born on October 13th, 1995, in Busan, South Korea. He grew up in a city known for its coastline and its particular brand of warmth. Busan people have a reputation for being direct, loyal, and a little louder than everyone else. From a young age, Jimin was drawn to movement, to dance, to the specific language that the body speaks when words aren't enough. He trained at the Busan High School of Arts before being accepted into Big Hit Entertainment, now HYB, and eventually becoming one of the 7 members of a group called Bangtan Sonyeondan. BTS. If you're watching this video, you probably already know what BTS became. But let's say it out loud anyway, because it's the kind of story that deserves to be told fully. A group of 7 young men from South Korea, signed to a company that nobody was paying attention to, debuted in 2013 with almost no industry support and carved out, through sheer force of talent and authenticity, and a fandom that grew into one of the most organized and devoted communities in music history, a place at the very top of the global music industry. Grammy nominations, stadium tours, #1 singles on the Billboard Hot 100, sold-out shows on every continent, a cultural footprint so large that scholars started writing papers about it, universities started offering courses about it, and governments started paying attention to what it meant for the global reach of Korean culture. And through all of it, through every milestone and every record and every moment that made the world turn its head, Jimin was there, present in a specific way, not just performing, but giving. There has always been something about the way Jimin approaches his work that separates him from a simple understanding of celebrity. Other artists perform for audiences. Jimin performs with them. There's a permeability to it, a willingness to be affected by the people in the room that is immediately visible to anyone paying attention. Fans have described it in 100 different ways, in 100 different languages, but the core of it is always the same. When you watch Jimin on stage, you feel like he sees you. Individually, specifically, like out of everyone in that arena, he found your face. That quality, that particular kind of attention, is not something that can be manufactured. It's not a technique you learn in a training program. It's a character trait, and it's the thing that has made Jimin not just a successful idol, but something more complicated and more meaningful to the people who follow him. He became, for many fans, a kind of companion. Someone whose voice they knew, as well as the voices of people they'd grown up with. Someone whose growth they'd watched over years, whose struggles they'd observed, and whose joy they'd celebrated, until the line between admiring someone and genuinely caring about them became impossible to locate. Which is why, when BTS went quiet, the quiet was so loud. The decision was not unexpected. South Korean men are required by law to complete mandatory military service, and BTS had navigated a long and complicated public conversation about when and how that would happen. When it was finally confirmed, when the members began enlisting one by one through 2022 and 2023, there was a particular kind of grief in the fandom that was real and valid and also slightly hard to explain to people on the outside. Because from the outside, it looks like waiting for a band to come back. And from the inside, it feels like a version of loss. Jimin completed his military service. All 7 members did. And as 2025 came to a close and whispers started circulating that the return was imminent, that BTS was preparing something, that the silence was finally ending, the fandom, which had never really dispersed, began to reassemble itself. The anticipation built slowly at first, and then all at once, the way these things do. March 20th, 2026, the album dropped. Arirang, named after one of the most ancient and beloved folk songs in Korean history. A song about longing, about separation, about the ache of leaving home and the hope of returning. A song that Koreans have sung for centuries at moments of national significance, moments of collective feeling, moments when something needs to be said that ordinary language can't hold. The choice of that title was not accidental. Nothing about BTS ever is. It was a statement about what the album was, about distance and return, about the 4 years of silence and the meaning of coming back. The music itself hit the world like a wave. Streams collapsed records. Social media became a wall of reaction videos, of fans crying in their cars, of people who had been waiting for years, finally hearing the thing they've been waiting for. The title track, Swim, entered the charts at positions that stunned even the most optimistic industry observers. And then, on March 21st, BTS performed at Gwangwamun, one of the most historically significant public spaces in all of Seoul, in a free concert that was simultaneously intimate and enormous, that drew hundreds of thousands of people to the surrounding streets, that was streamed by millions more around the world, and that was later released on Netflix as BTS, the comeback live Arirang. It was historic. It was the first time in nearly 4 years that all 7 members had shared a stage. It was, by every measurable standard, a massive moment. The kind of moment that gets written into the record books immediately. But the world tour hadn't started yet. The world tour was beginning on April 9th in Goyang. And between the Gwangwamun concert and that date, something interesting happened. The fandom, which had been running on pure adrenaline since the album announcement, began to shift into a different kind of energy. The frantic excitement of the comeback settled into something slower and more serious. People started to feel the weight of what was coming. The tour was being called the largest in K-pop history. 79 concerts, 34 regions, a year-long journey around the globe that would take BTS to cities they had never performed in before and back to cities where they had sold out stadiums a decade ago. It was enormous in a way that was almost abstract, almost too big to hold in your mind at once. So instead, fans held the first show, Goyang, April 9th. That was the specific thing. That was the night that everything was starting. And the fans who had tickets, who had won them through lotteries, purchased them through pre-sales, sometimes traveled from other countries to secure them, those fans began preparing with the particular intensity that comes when you know you are about to be part of something that will be remembered. Support projects were organized across the fandom. Fan sites were planning coverage. Army bombs were charged. Outfits were chosen. Transportation was arranged. Hotels were booked. The infrastructure of fandom love, which is genuinely impressive in its scale and coordination, was mobilizing around this one night. For Jimin's fans specifically, the preparations were extraordinary. Fan clubs from across the globe had pooled resources and organized a series of support projects centered on Goyang. Advertisements featuring Jimin were displayed at Daewha Station, the subway stop nearest to the venue, for the entire month of April. Illuminated billboards at GTXA Kintex Station, another major transit hub for the concert area, carried Jimin's image. Beginning April 8th, banner advertisements were installed around the entire perimeter of Goyang Stadium. And on April 9th, the first day of the concert, a 5-ton LED truck, 7 meters by 3 meters, covered in visuals supporting Jimin's world tour, was deployed in the area around Goyang Sports Complex. It had started its route the previous day near the HYB headquarters in Yongsan, driving through the city like a moving declaration. And then there were the fans who were distributing them, 10,000 handheld fans, designed specifically for the Arirang World Tour, given away for free over the 2 concert days. 10,000, designed, printed, funded entirely by fans. Because this is what devoted fandom looks like when it has the time and the resources to express itself fully. It looks like logistics. It looks like permits filed with local government and tax documentation completed and LED trucks rented and 10,000 items manufactured and distributed. It looks, from the outside, like something between a corporation and a love letter. All of this was the backdrop. All of this was the world that April 9th was arriving into. And then, the morning of April 9th, it started to rain. Not a light rain. Not the kind that you might almost enjoy if you were in the right mood. The kind that makes the air smell clean and gives everything a soft, cinematic edge. This was a different kind of rain. Heavy and cold, and the sort of persistent that wears you down slowly, that finds the gaps in your jacket and works its way through, that turns the ground slick and the air raw and makes everything just slightly harder than it needs to be. Across Seoul and Goyang, the fans kept going anyway. The ones with tickets made their way to the stadium. The ones without tickets made their way to the area anyway, to the outdoor screens, to the fan gathering zones, to the streets where they could be near the energy of the night, even if they couldn't be inside the building. People who had traveled internationally showed up. People who had been awake since before sunrise showed up. People who had been planning this night for months, who had marked the date in their calendars, who had arranged their entire lives around this specific evening, they all showed up in the rain and they stayed. Inside the stadium, preparations continued. The production crew was running through final checks. The elaborate stage design that had been built for this tour, a structure inspired by the concept of a picture frame, grounding the show simultaneously in BTS's modern energy and in the cultural and historical significance of their homeland, was being tested one last time. Somewhere in the building, 7 men were doing whatever they do in the hours before a show of this magnitude. Running vocal checks, reviewing choreography, managing the particular combination of exhaustion and adrenaline that precedes a major performance. And at some point in those final hours, at some point while all of that was happening, while the machinery of this enormous production continued to operate around him, Jimin picked up his phone and saw a video. The video had been posted by an army, a fan who had arrived at Goyang Stadium early, who was standing outside in the rain waiting for the gates to open, who was soaked and cold and completely, utterly unbothered by any of it. In the video, she was dancing to Idol, the BTS song that has always carried a particular energy, that specific combination of defiant joy and self-acceptance that makes it one of those songs that makes you want to move even when you're standing on wet concrete in the cold. She was dancing in the rain, in front of the venue, completely committed, the way you only dance when you've forgotten that anyone might be watching. Jimin saw it, and he commented, "It's gonna be cold." 5 words. Simple, direct, unadorned by anything. No performance in them, no calculation, no attempt to construct a moment. Just a person reading a situation, expressing concern. And the fan responded, "Appa, you're going to be cold too. It's okay. Please complete today's show without getting hurt." I want to slow down here because I think it's possible to read that exchange and let it pass too quickly. I think it's possible to think, okay, cute, moving on, and miss the entire point of why it matters. Consider what was happening on that day. Consider the scale of what Jimin was walking into. The BTS World Tour Erarang was not a small production. It was not a comeback show or a special event or a limited engagement. It was the beginning of 79 concerts across 34 regions, a global undertaking that had been years in the making, that carried the weight of 4 years of absence, that had an entire industry and an entire fandom watching to see how it would unfold. The opening night of a tour like that is one of the highest pressure moments in the professional life of any performer. Everything is being established. The tone, the set list, the production, the energy, it all comes together on night 1, and night 1 sets the template for everything that follows. Jimin was hours away from that moment. In the middle of that preparation, with all of that weight on him, he was on social media. He saw a video of a fan dancing in the rain. And his first instinct, not his second instinct, not something he did after the show was over and the pressure was behind him, but his immediate instinct was to reach out, to acknowledge the cold, to see the person. That is not nothing. That is in fact everything. Because there's a version of celebrity where the person in the building and the person outside the building exist in entirely separate worlds. Where the performer is protected from the reality of the crowd by layers of staff and schedule and psychological distance. Where the fans are understood as an abstract, as numbers, as demographics, as a revenue source, as a concept called audience, rather than a specific human being standing in specific rain being specifically cold. Jimin has never operated that way. His entire career is a record of doing the opposite. And on April 9th, in one of the most distilled versions of that truth we have ever seen, he looked through his phone at a fan standing in the rain and thought, she's going to be cold. When the message spread, and it spread immediately, the way these things do now, ricocheting around social media in real time across every platform and every language and every corner of the fandom at once, the reaction was something that observers who weren't deep in the fandom found hard to understand. People were crying. Not sad crying, not grief or disappointment, but the specific kind of crying that happens when something you've always believed is confirmed. When you find out that the thing you thought was real actually is. For years, ARMY had operated on a kind of faith. The faith that behind the performances and the stages and the industry machinery, there were real people who genuinely cared. And you can see evidence of that in 1,000 moments over the years, in interviews, in social media posts, in the way BTS members have consistently treated their fans with a specificity and warmth that goes beyond what is professionally required. But there is always a version of doubt available. The voice that says maybe it's calculated, maybe it's managed, maybe the care is real but the expression of it is curated. 5 words in a comment section, 3 hours before the biggest concert of the year, with no audience to perform for and no camera pointing at him, written to a single fan standing in the rain. That voice doesn't really have anywhere to go. The gates opened. The fans poured in. 60,000 people filled Going Stadium, and the rain kept falling, and the light sticks came out, and the air in that building changed into the particular electric atmosphere that happens when tens of thousands of people are feeling the same thing at the same time. It becomes something you can almost touch. And then the lights went down. There are things about a concert that cameras capture and things they cannot. The footage that exists from the opening night of the BTS World Tour Arirang in Goyang is extraordinary. It shows the scale, the production, the performance, the synchronized ocean of light from 60,000 army bombs. It shows Jimin on stage with a precision and an intensity that confirms everything you've ever heard about him as a performer. It shows the crowd singing back every word. It shows, in other words, the event. What it cannot show is what it felt like to be inside it. The people who were there have described it in terms that keep bumping up against the limits of language. One fan, who had traveled from the Philippines, said that when the opening notes played, her legs stopped working. Not metaphorically. She said her body just gave up its structural function for a moment, like it couldn't hold the feeling and stay upright simultaneously. She had a friend on either side of her. She didn't fall, but for a few seconds, she was somewhere else entirely. Another fan, a man in his 30s who had been in ARMY since 2017 and had attended multiple BTS concerts before the hiatus, said that the first 15 minutes of the show felt like being translated into another language. Like everything that he knew himself to be was briefly suspended in favor of something larger and harder to name. He said he's been to a lot of concerts, and he's always known the difference between a good show and a transcendent one, and this was the second kind. A fan from Brazil who had saved for over a year to afford the trip, who had never seen BTS live before, said simply, "I understood everything they've ever tried to tell us. Standing there, I understood it. These are not the testimonies of casual concertgoers. These are the testimonies of people who had been waiting, in some cases for years, for this specific night. People who had carried something with them through the hiatus, some version of hope or faith or stubbornness, or love that had not diminished despite the distance and the time. And when the thing they'd been waiting for finally arrived, it didn't disappoint them. It exceeded them. It exceeded the version of it they'd been holding in their minds. Jimin performed that night with everything. There is no other way to say it. Every piece of choreography, every vocal moment, every transition, it was executed with the precision of someone who has spent their entire adult life perfecting their craft, and delivered with the feeling of someone for whom this particular night meant more than a performance. He has talked in the past about what it means to him to stand in front of an audience, about the specific responsibility he feels, the specific commitment. And on April 9th, all of that was visible in every second of his time on stage. There were moments that people are still talking about weeks later. A specific point in the swim performance, the title track, the centerpiece of the new album, where Jimin paused at the edge of the stage and looked out at the crowd in a way that had nothing performative about it. It lasted only a few seconds, But in those seconds, in the footage that fans captured and have watched hundreds of times since, you can see something happening in his face that is difficult to describe and impossible to fake. He's memorizing it. He's standing at the edge of this enormous thing and trying to take it in completely, trying to hold it. The crowd somehow felt it. The energy in the building shifted in those few seconds in a way that fans in the upper levels said they could feel as a change in sound. The collective held breath of 60,000 people, all at once. And outside in the rain, the fans who couldn't get in were still there. They had been there for hours. They were wet and cold and standing in the dark watching screens and listening to sound that carried from inside the stadium, and they stayed. Every single song, every single moment. They stayed through the rain until the final note, and then they stayed after, talking to each other, sharing what they'd seen on their phones, processing the night together in the communal way that fandoms have always processed things. There's something worth saying about those fans specifically. The ones outside, the ones who didn't have tickets and came anyway. Because their presence there, their decision to show up to a thing they couldn't fully attend, to be near it even without access to it, is actually the most pure expression of what this entire story is about. They weren't there for the spectacle. They couldn't see the spectacle. They were there because being near something you love, even when you can't fully reach it, is better than being away from it entirely. They were there because proximity to something meaningful has its own kind of meaning. And Jimin, earlier that day, had looked at a fan doing the same thing, standing outside in the wet and the cold, dancing in the rain because she couldn't do anything else with the feeling, and said it's going to be cold. He saw them. All of them. The night ended. The lights came back up. The production wound down. 60,000 people moved toward the exits, into the rain that was still falling, carrying the night with them like something they'd been given to hold. The reviews went up immediately. Not professional reviews, but the immediate raw kind, the kind that appear in real time as fans process what just happened. Twitter threads, Weber's posts, long captions on Instagram from people who'd run out of words, and were using all of them anyway. Videos of fans in tears outside the venue, not able to fully explain why they were crying except that it was that kind of night. The kind where you feel something so fully that the only place it has to go is out. The comment, the 5 words, had by now spread entirely beyond the fandom. It was being picked up by entertainment news sites, by general interest media, by people who had no particular investment in BTS or K-pop but who understood, instinctively, that a story about a performer noticing a fan standing in the rain was a human story, was a story about what it looks like when someone is genuinely paying attention. Those stories don't belong exclusively to any fandom. They translate, they cross every border. And in the days that followed, as the tour continued and the fandom continued to process April 9th, the conversation kept returning to that moment. Not to the spectacle, not to the stage design or the set list or the production value, as impressive as all of those things were, but to the 5 words, to the comment in the rain, to the evidence it provided of something the fandom had always known but that the world was catching up to slowly. Jimin has never, in over a decade of being one of the most recognized faces in global music, allowed the distance between himself and the people who love his work to become comfortable. He has never settled into the version of celebrity where the fans are background, are scenery, are the context in which your life happens. He has treated them, consistently, specifically, in ways large and small, as the reason for the work. Not in the abstract, gratitude speech way. In the practical, seeing you standing in the rain way. In the I noticed you before my biggest show way. That is not easy to do. That is, in fact, one of the harder things to maintain as a career extends and success compounds, and the structures that surround a person of that level of celebrity make genuine contact increasingly difficult. It requires an active decision to stay open, to keep looking, to resist the insulation that fame builds around a person, and keep the window cracked. Jimin has kept the window cracked. The tour continues. After Goyang, the itinerary takes BTS across Asia, then to North America, then through Europe, then to South America, then back, a year-long circuit of the globe that will put them in front of millions of people across 34 regions. The North American leg begins at the end of April, with shows at Raymond James Stadium in Tampa before moving through multiple cities and ending in Los Angeles. After that, Europe. After that, the rest of the world. Each city will have its own version of a story. Each night will have its own 60,000 people, its own specific rain, its own collection of moments that fans will carry with them for the rest of their lives. The tour is only beginning. There are months of it still ahead. But this one, Goyang, April 9th, the rain and the comment in the first night, this one is already finished being made. It's already in the past. And the past, once it becomes history, belongs to everyone. Here is what I want you to take from this story. Not just the facts of it, not just the timeline and the details and the specific circumstances of one rainy night in a city outside Seoul, but the thing underneath the facts, the principle it demonstrates. There's a version of success that requires you to stop seeing people individually. That requires you to process the world in categories, audience, fan base, demographic, rather than in faces. That version of success is understandable. It's protective. When you exist at a scale where millions of people have feelings about you, when your decisions affect careers and livelihoods and the emotions of a global community, there is genuine psychological logic to building some distance, to managing your attention carefully, to not being able to afford the vulnerability of truly seeing every individual person who is there because of your work. Jimin has never taken that deal. And on April 9th, 2026, 3 hours before he walked onto a stage in front of 60,000 people to open the largest K-pop world tour in history, he picked up his phone, saw a single fan dancing in the rain, and told her it was going to be cold. That's the story. That's all of it. Not the spectacle. The spectacle is real and it was extraordinary, and we have the footage to prove it. But the story is smaller than the spectacle. The story is one person noticing another person. The story is an artist who has spent more than a decade in the most visible position in global entertainment and has somehow, stubbornly, insistently, managed to stay human. 60,000 people stood in the rain for him that night. He noticed one of them, and somehow, that made him see all of them. If you've made it to the end of this video, thank you for spending this time with this story. If you were there on April 9th, inside the stadium, or outside it, in Goyang or watching from somewhere across the world, I hope this captured something of what that night meant. And if you're just discovering this story now, welcome to it. There's a lot more to come. The tour is only just beginning. The world is watching. And Jimin, as always, is watching back.